She had always been a quiet girl. It's the kind of person people noticed only when they needed someone calm to keep things running smoothly. She moved through life gently, never raising her voice, never demanding attention, and never trying to stand out. Most people around her assumed she was simply shy or uninterested in anything loud or bold. But there was more to her than anyone realized, something hidden so deep inside that even she didn't fully understand it yet. She lived in a small neighborhood where everyone knew each other by face, if not by name. Her days passed in a predictable patterned school in the morning, chores in the afternoon, and quiet moments in the evening when she could finally sit alone in her room. She liked peaceful things, the soft rustling of tree leaves, the distant sound of kids playing outside, and the calm rhythm of her own breathing. She never thought of herself as someone who would chase big dreams or take dramatic steps. She simply did what life was put in front of her. But one afternoon changed everything. It happened when she wandered into the community center after school. She often went there to read or finish homework because it was quiet and rarely crowded. But that day, as she walked down the hallway, she heard a sound she had never really paid attention to before. It was faint, almost like a whisper, a soft melody floating through the air. Curious, she followed it until she reached a door slightly open. Inside the room stood an old upright piano. The paint was chipped, the wood looked worn by time, and a single ray of sunlight fell across the dusty keys. No one was sitting there now. Whoever had been playing had already left, and the last note was still fading from the room. She stood at the doorway for a long moment, listening to the silence that followed. She did not know what made her walk inside. She wasn't the type to touch things that didn't belong to her, especially something as grand as a piano. But there was something about the empty room and the soft echo still hanging in the air that drew her closer. She slowly stepped forward and placed her fingertips on the cool keys. They felt smooth and slightly dusty. She pressed one key very lightly. A small, delicate sound came out. It surprised her how simple it was to make a sound, and how that one note filled the room just enough to make the silence feel warm instead of empty. She pressed another key, then another. She didn't know how to play anything. She had never been taught. But for some reason, even the random notes gave her a feeling she couldn't understand. It was like something inside her chest softened, then opened. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something she had never felt before. As if a quiet door inside her had been unlocked. She sat down on the old wooden bench, her hands trembling slightly. She pressed a few more keys, letting the sounds mix together. Some notes sounded pleasant, others felt strange, but she didn't mind. She wasn't trying to play a song. She was simply touching the instrument, learning its voice. When she finally stood up, she felt different, lighter, yet full of something she didn't have a name for. She went home without mentioning the piano to anyone. There was no reason to talk about it. No one in her family played music. They were practical people, focused on daily needs and responsibilities. Music was considered a luxury, not a necessity. They wouldn't understand why she felt drawn to that old piano, but she couldn't forget it. The next day, she returned to the room again. This time, she stayed a little longer. She pressed more keys, trying to create patterns. She didn't know what she was doing, but it felt right. She closed her eyes once and let her fingers move across the keys slowly, imagining what it might feel like to truly play. Something inside her responded, something that felt alive. Day after day, she kept going back. It became a quiet secret, something she didn't share with anyone. She wasn't hiding it because she was ashamed. She was hiding it because it felt sacred. She didn't want anyone to interrupt the feelings she got when she touched the keys and the room filled with soft, uneven sounds. One evening, she reached home later than usual. Her mother noticed the dust on her fingers and asked where she had been. She simply said she had stayed longer at the community center. Her mother didn't question it. Life at home was busy. There wasn't much time to ask for details. Still, the girl's routine began to shift. She rushed through her chores, finished her schoolwork quickly, and left the house as soon as she could. Her heart beat a little faster each time she reached the room with the old piano. She never knew what she would try that day. New sounds, new patterns, new combinations. She wasn't learning songs yet, but she was learning herself. She slowly became more sensitive to the way each note felt. She learned how lightly or firmly she needed to press for different sounds. She discovered the feeling of soft keys under her fingertips, the way vibrations traveled through the wood, the way the room changed whenever she played something slightly more coherent than before. No one else around her noticed the changes happening within her. At school, she remained the same quiet girl who kept to herself. Teachers liked her because she never caused trouble. Classmates didn't pay much attention to her because she didn't try to join conversations. She was invisible in the way that gentle people often are. But inside, she was changing. One day, she walked into the community center and found someone sitting at the piano. It surprised her. She had gotten used to the room being empty. The person playing was an older woman, perhaps a volunteer or a visitor. The woman's hands moved confidently across the keys, producing a song that filled the room with warmth. The girl stood quietly near the door, not wanting to disturb her. The music was different from the random notes she played. This was controlled, emotional, full. She didn't know the song, but she felt its meaning. It made her chest feel tight, but in a good way. When the woman finished, the girl softly stepped inside to return the bench to its place. The woman noticed her and smiled kindly. "Do you play?" the woman asked. The girl froze for a moment. She didn't know what to say. Play. She didn't think pressing keys and making clumsy sounds counted as playing. "I just try," she whispered. "That's how everyone starts," the woman said warmly. The girl nodded, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to attention. Before she could say anything else, the woman stood up, gathered her things, and left the room. But before leaving, she said one last sentence. "Keep trying. You never know where it can take you." Those words stayed with the girl long after the woman disappeared down the hallway. The next time she sat down at the piano, her fingers felt different. She remembered the woman's confident playing, the warmth of the music, and the encouragement in her voice. For the first time, the girl felt something like determination, not loud or fierce, but gentle and steady. She pressed the keys again, forming patterns she had repeated so many times. But now, she tried harder. She tried to make the sound smoother, the rhythm more even. She listened to each note carefully, adjusting her fingers when something didn't sound right. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't even dream of performing. All she wanted was to bring out the feeling she sensed deep inside, the feeling that had awakened the first time she touched the piano. Little by little, the music became more natural. Her hands grew more confident. She began to enjoy the small progress she made every day, even if it was barely noticeable to anyone else. Each improvement felt like a small victory, something she earned quietly as weeks passed. The girl realized she was no longer simply pressing keys. She was learning to express something she couldn't put into words. Music became her language, her comfort, her space where she didn't need to explain herself. She still didn't call herself a musician. She still didn't tell anyone about her growing passion to the world. She was still the quiet girl who preferred the background. But the piano knew her better. It knew her soft beginnings, her hidden strength, her quiet persistence. Every time she touched the keys, the piano reflected a part of her she had never shown before. And though no one realized it yet, she was slowly becoming someone entirely different from the girl they thought they knew. She never planned for her life to change. But once the piano found its way into her routine, everything else seemed to shift around it. What began as curiosity slowly grew into something stronger, something she carried inside her like a quiet fire that no one else could see. While the outside world still saw her as the gentle girl who rarely spoke more than necessary, her inner world had begun to expand in ways she could hardly understand. At home, life continued with its usual rhythm. She woke early, helped with chores, and prepared for school with the same calm expression she always wore. Her family saw her as dependable, someone who followed rules and didn't ask for much. This was true, but there was a new energy inside her, a sense of wanting something she had never dared to want before. She didn't have a piano at home only, a small, old keyboard that had missing keys and uneven sounds. It had been given to her younger sibling years ago, but no one ever used it seriously. Still, she now found herself spending late nights practicing on it, even though many keys didn't work properly. She sat on the floor with the keyboard in front of her, trying to repeat the patterns she had learned at the community center. The sound was flat and sometimes unpleasant, but she focused anyway. Every evening, when the house began to quiet down and her family settled into their own routines, she plugged in the old keyboard and placed her fingertips on the plastic keys. She closed her eyes and replayed the feeling she got from the piano at the center, the weight of the wooden keys. The soft echo in the room, the way sound seemed to wrap around her. She tried to imitate that feeling on the broken keyboard. It wasn't the same, but it was enough to keep her going. Her progress was slow. Many nights she grew frustrated with the uneven sounds and missing notes. She wished she had access to a real piano all the time. But wishing didn't change anything, so she simply practiced with what she had. She focused on rhythm, finger movement, and the small details she remembered from the afternoons at the community center. School became more difficult for her. It's not because she struggled with her studies, but because she spent so much time thinking about the piano. During lessons, she would tap her fingers lightly on her notebook, testing patterns from memory. When her teacher asked questions, she answered politely. But her mind drifted back to the sound of the keys. One day during a break, she visited the school music room. It wasn't a place she usually went because most students who hung out there were loud and confident. They played guitars, sang together, or tried to show off. But she walked in quietly and sat in a corner, observing. There was a small keyboard in the room. Not as old as the one she had at home, but still a simple one, meant for beginners. She waited until the room emptied before she approached it. Her hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but because she didn't want anyone to see her trying something she cared so deeply about. She pressed the keys gently, testing the sound. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than what she had at home. She practiced for a few minutes, repeating simple patterns she had been working on for weeks. Just as she began to lose herself in the moment, she heard footsteps approaching. She instantly lifted her hands, stood up, and stepped away from the keyboard. A group of students walked in, laughing loudly, not paying attention to her. She slipped out of the room quietly, her heart pounding as if she had been caught doing something wrong. But the truth was, she wanted to get better. She wanted to be able to sit confidently at any keyboard, any piano, and let her hands do what her heart wanted. That desire, though quiet, grew stronger every day. Weeks passed, and the older woman who had played the piano at the community center never returned. The girl kept expecting to see her again, hoping for more encouragement or even a simple smile. But the room remained empty each time she entered. It was hers now, her private place. She experimented with new patterns, trying to create small melodies. Sometimes she would get stuck on one combination of notes, repeating it again and again until it felt smoother. Other times she would let her fingers wander freely, following instinct rather than any plan. Slowly, she began to understand how to shape sound. But along with learning came doubt. One afternoon, as she played a simple rhythm, 2 children ran past the open door. They stopped and peeked inside. She froze instantly, her hands stuck above the keys. "Are you the one who plays here?" one of them asked. She shook her head quickly. "I just try," she whispered. The children stared for a moment, then ran away, losing interest. But the interruption stayed with her. She wondered if she sounded childish. People might think she was pretending to know something she didn't. That night, she sat on the floor with her broken keyboard and stared at it without touching the keys. She wondered if she was wasting her time. She had no teacher, no lessons, no proper instrument. She knew people who took classes, learned from professionals, and practiced on expensive pianos. Compared to them, she felt small. But then she remembered the feeling she got the first time she touched the old piano, the warmth, the spark, the sense of something opening inside her. She remembered the older woman's words, "Keep trying. You never know where it can take you." That encouragement might have been simple, but it came at the right moment. She reached forward and placed her hands on the keyboard again. She practiced for hours. Her fingers ached, her eyes grew tired, but she kept going. She repeated every pattern she knew until she could play them without thinking. She practiced slow rhythms, fast rhythms, soft touches, harder touches. She practiced until the sound of the broken keyboard faded into the background. all she could hear was the music she imagined. The next day, she returned to the community center with newfound confidence. She sat at the piano and let her fingers move without hesitation. The room filled with gentle sound, a mixture of practice and emotion. She no longer played random notes. She played small pieces she had created herself. The more she played, the more she felt like she belonged at the piano. But her journey was not without obstacles. One afternoon, as she played, the manager of the community center walked by and stepped into the room. He listened silently for a moment. She froze, expecting him to ask her to stop. Instead, he smiled faintly. "You're here a lot," he said. "Do you like playing?" She nodded shyly. "Just make sure you don't stay too late. Some of the staff lock up early." That was all he said before leaving. But to her, it felt like permission, a small reassurance that she wasn't doing anything wrong by spending so much time there. Her confidence grew. She began to experiment with longer melodies, trying to shape them into something meaningful. Some days, she surprised herself with the sounds she created. Other days she grew frustrated, especially when her hands didn't cooperate or when the piano went slightly out of tune. Still, she continued, as the weeks turned into months. Her progress became noticeable, at least to herself. Her hands no longer trembled when she sat at the piano. She no longer hesitated before pressing the first key. The instrument had become familiar, almost like a friend, but the biggest struggle remained inside her. She couldn't help but feel uncertain about the future. Was she meant to continue this? Was she simply chasing something she could never truly reach? The thought didn't discourage her enough to stop, but it lingered in the back of her mind. One evening, after a long day at school, she walked into the community center and found the piano covered with a protective cloth. A note was taped to the music stand. "Piano tuning in progress. Please do not use until tomorrow." She stared at the note for a long time. She felt strangely empty without the piano. She sat on the bench anyway, running her fingers across the cloth-covered keys. She closed her eyes, imagining the sound, without thinking. She began tapping the edge of the bench in rhythm, replaying the patterns she had practiced the night before. Her mind filled in the missing notes. The next day, when she lifted the cloth, the piano sounded clearer, brighter, more alive. She pressed a few keys and felt her chest tighten with happiness. She played more confidently than ever before. It was during that moment when the fresh sound filled the room that she realized something important. She didn't need outside validation. She didn't need applause or lessons or fancy instruments to begin. She didn't need people to think she was talented. She only needed the piano. And the piano, in its own quiet way, needed her too. Her journey was still at the beginning, but she was no longer just a gentle girl who blended into the background. She was becoming someone who carried her strength silently, letting it grow through every note she played, and though no one else saw it yet, she was preparing herself for the moment the world would finally hear. What she had been building inside all along, she had never imagined that someone would one day ask her to play in front of other people. The idea itself felt unreal, almost frightening. She had always played alone in the quiet room at the community center, or in her own bedroom late at night. Music had been her private world, a place where she didn't have to speak or explain herself. But life, without asking her permission, was slowly beginning to change. It started on a warm afternoon. The community center was busier than usual because a small event was being planned, something simple, just a neighborhood gathering with a few performances. When she entered the building with her backpack slung over her shoulder, she noticed a group of people discussing decorations, chairs, and a short program of activities. She didn't pay much attention at first. Events like these happened every few months, and she had never been involved. She walked toward the music room as always, expecting it to be empty. But when she reached the door, she found the same older woman she had seen months ago, the one who had encouraged her, gently speaking with the center manager. The woman held a stack of papers, and the manager smiled politely as they talked. The girl froze in place, unsure whether to enter. Before she could decide, the woman noticed her. "There you are," the woman said warmly, as if she had been waiting for her. "I was hoping to see you again." The girl's heart raced. She stepped slowly into the room, confused about why she, of all people, would be someone the woman was looking for. The manager nodded toward her. "She's always here," he said kindly. "Plays almost every day." The girl lowered her eyes, embarrassed but also strangely proud. The woman smiled. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you," she said. "We're putting together a small recital for the neighborhood event. Just a few short performances from local kids and volunteers. Nothing formal, nothing stressful. I was wondering—" She paused, studying the girl's face gently. "Would you like to play something?" The question felt like a heavy stone dropped into her chest. Play. In front of people. Her hands went cold. Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. She had barely begun to understand the piano herself. She wasn't sure if what she played even counted as a real performance. She didn't know proper techniques or advanced pieces. Everything she knew had come from practice, instinct, and the memory of sounds she admired. "I don't think I'm good enough," she whispered. "You don't need to be perfect," the woman replied with a soft smile. "Just play something you feel comfortable with. It can even be something simple. The purpose isn't to impress anyone, but to share what you love." Share what she loved. No one had ever said something like that to her. The manager stepped forward. "It's a friendly event," he added. "People just enjoy listening. You do great." She stood silently, her heart beat loud in her ears. She wanted to say no. She wanted to run out of the room and escape the pressure that suddenly wrapped around her. But something kept her rooted, a tiny spark inside her. The same spark that had lit the day she first touched the piano keys. She nodded slowly. "Okay," we whispered. The woman clapped her hands softly. "Wonderful. You'll do beautifully. The event is in 2 weeks, so you have time. Practice whatever makes you feel at ease." 2 weeks. The moment she left the room, she felt the weight of those words. She had agreed to something that felt terrifying. She wasn't used to people watching her. She barely spoke to classmates at school. She avoided attention whenever possible. And now she was supposed to sit in front of a crowd and play? She walked home with her thoughts tangled like threads. When she reached her room, she sat on the floor in front of her broken keyboard and stared at it for a long time. How was she supposed to prepare for something like this? She placed her fingers on the keys and played a few familiar patterns. The sound wavered unevenly because of the missing keys, but she didn't stop. She played the patterns she loved most, the ones she built herself over weeks of practice. Melodies that felt like whispers of her own thoughts as she played. Something slowly became clear. The music didn't need to be complicated. It only needed to be hers. The next day, she arrived at the community center earlier than usual. She sat at the piano and tried to shape her favorite patterns into a complete piece. She started with a soft introduction, simple and gentle, then added a deeper rhythm, letting the notes blend into something slightly stronger. She repeated the sequence again and again, adjusting tiny parts each time. Sometimes she grew frustrated when she couldn't get the transition right. Sometimes she stared at the keys as if expecting them to tell her what to do. But she kept trying. Day after day, she practiced. The woman stopped by occasionally to listen, offering small nods of encouragement. The manager would pass by the doorway and smile. Other people in the center heard her playing too, but she didn't look in their direction. She just kept her focus on the keys. As the days passed, she began to feel something she didn't expect. Excitement. It was quiet, buried under nerves, but it was there. She liked shaping the piece. She liked improving the parts that sounded rough. She liked hearing the music grow stronger, clearer, more meaningful. At school, she continued practicing on the small keyboard in the music room whenever she found an empty moment. She didn't care about the noise or the students passing by outside the door. She had a goal now. Still, the fear remained. Each night, she imagined sitting on the stage with people watching. Her stomach twisted at the thought. She imagined her hands freezing, the notes disappearing from her memory, the room falling silent in the worst way, but she practiced anyway. Finally, the day of the event arrived. The community center was filled with people, families, children, volunteers, neighbors. The room buzzed with chatter and laughter. Decorations hung from the walls, and rows of chairs were arranged facing a small stage at the front. She stood near the back of the room, holding her hands tightly together, trying to calm her breathing. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She didn't know where to look. Everywhere she turned, she saw people. The woman approached her with a soft smile. "You'll be all right," she said. "Just breathe. Play the way you always do when the room is empty. Imagine it's just you and the piano." The girl nodded, though she wasn't sure she could follow that advice. The idea of imagining the room empty felt impossible when dozens of eyes were right there as the program began. She listened to others perform. A young boy played guitar. A girl sang a soft song. A group of children recited short poems. Everyone received applause. Everyone looked comfortable, in their own way. Then the announcer called her. Her legs felt stiff as she walked toward the stage. She kept her eyes down, afraid to meet anyone's gaze. She reached the bench and sat slowly, adjusting her hands with trembling fingers. The room grew quiet. She took a deep breath. She pressed the first key. The note sounded soft and unsure. Her hands trembled. Her mind whispered that she was going to fail. Then she remembered something. The way the piano had felt on the very first day she touched it, warm, safe, like a door opening. She pressed the next key, and the next one. The melody she had practiced bloomed quietly through the room. At first it was gentle, almost too soft. But as she continued, her fingers settled. Her breath steadied. The rhythm she had built over weeks flowed through her hands. The room faded away. She no longer saw the crowd or the stage or the lights. All she saw in her mind was the old piano room, the dust on the keys, the sunlight on the wood, the feeling of being alone with the music. Her playing became smoother, stronger, more confident. The melody filled the room in waves, rising gently, falling softly. She added the deeper rhythm she had practiced so many times, letting it flow naturally by the time she reached the final note. The room was completely silent. For a moment, she thought she had done something wrong. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was warm, genuine. People smiled at her as she stood and stepped away from the piano. The woman who encouraged her clapped proudly. The manager nodded with satisfaction. She walked off stage with her heart still racing. But now it raced for a different reason, not fear, but relief, joy, pride. She had done something she'd never believed she could do. Later, when the event ended, a few people came up to her and told her they loved her performance. She didn't know how to respond, except with shy nods and quiet thank yous. That evening, as she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. The world around her looked the same: quiet streets, familiar buildings, distant noises, but something in her had changed. She had stepped into a place she'd never thought she belonged and found that she could exist there too. She wasn't just the gentle girl anymore. She was someone who had faced a room full of people and let her music speak for her, and without realizing it, she had begun the next chapter of her journey, the one where her hidden strength would finally start to grow. In the open, the days leading up to the competition seemed to stretch and tighten around her like an invisible thread. Every morning, she woke with the same thought in her mind: the piano, the hall, the people watching, and the moment she would have to prove that her gentle beginnings did not mean she lacked power. She carried this thought with her through breakfast, through walks outside, and through the hours she spent practicing until the sun dipped low and the room filled with shadows. But even with the pressure growing quietly inside her, she never let it turn into fear. Instead, she took it as a reminder that moments like these did not come easily. They had to be earned, shaped, and repeated until they felt like something she had known all her life. Her mentor watched her closely these days. He noticed the way her fingers moved differently, now firmer, more certain, yet still soft at the edges. She had found a balance between control and emotion, something that had taken months of effort and countless failed attempts. But now, when she sat at the piano, her touch carried strength without losing its gentleness. One evening, just a few days before the competition, she stayed longer than usual in the practice room. The lights overhead flickered softly. The quietness of the space made her feel like the piano was listening to her more closely than ever. She began to play, not the piece assigned to her, but something she made up on the spot. It was slow at first, just a few soft notes rising like the beginning of a whisper as she continued. The music grew still calm, but deeper, like a thought turning into a determination she hadn't yet spoken out loud. Her mentor stood outside the door for several minutes, listening without making a sound. He realized something important in that moment. She was not just practicing anymore. She was becoming someone who played from the very center of herself. The night before the competition, she slept lightly. Every small sound seemed louder than usual. Her heart beat a little faster. She lay awake for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and wondered how the next day would unfold. Would she freeze? Would her hands shake? Would her mind go blank in front of all those people? But then she remembered something her mentor had told her months ago, something she had repeated to herself many times. Strength isn't loud, it's steady. She took a slow breath, closed her eyes, and let that thought guide her into sleep. The morning came quietly. She dressed slowly, making sure her clothes were comfortable and simple. She tied her hair back in a loose way, not wanting anything to distract her. When she reached the performance hall, she felt a wave of cool air brush over her. It smelled faintly of polished wood and dust, a familiar scent that instantly calmed her. The hall was larger than any place she had performed before. Rows of empty seats stretched out before her, and at the front stood the grand piano, gleaming under soft stage lights. She walked toward it, each step slow, each sound echoing around her. She reached out and placed her hand on the smooth surface of the piano. It felt solid, steady, real, as she warmed up her fingers with a few gentle notes. The hall doors opened, and the sound of people entering drifted in. Soft footsteps, quiet voices, the rustle of clothing, it all blended together. Until the space that once felt wide became filled with a quiet energy, she took her seat backstage after warming up. Other performers passed by, some whispering nervously, others pacing with deep breaths. She listened to the faint music from the stage, each performer adding their sound to the air. She did not compare herself to them. She simply listened, letting their music become a reminder that everyone there had a story. A challenge, a moment they were reaching for. When her name was finally called, she felt her heart pick up its pace. She stood, took a breath, and walked toward the stage. Her steps were steady, even though the air around her seemed heavier than before. The lights were bright when she stepped onto the stage, but she did not let them overwhelm her. She kept her gaze low, focused only on the piano waiting for her. The audience was a blur in her peripheral vision, but she felt their presence like a silent wave. She sat down, adjusted the bench just a little, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she didn't move. She just breathed slow, controlled, steady. Then she began. The first notes were gentle. It's almost fragile, like the beginning of a story that needed time to unfold. But soon, the melody grew stronger. Her touch deepened. Her fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even her. The music filled the hall, rising and falling like a tide. It carried softness and strength together, woven into every measure. She wasn't just playing for the judges. She wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to show something she had long kept inside herself. As she continued, the audience grew silent. Not the usual polite silence of a performance, but something deeper. They leaned forward slightly. They held their breath. They felt something unspoken moving through the room. Halfway through the piece, she felt a small tremble rise in her chest, but she refused to let it turn into fear. She held on to the music instead, letting every note guide her forward. She remembered the long nights of practice, the quiet mornings, the uncertain days when she wasn't sure she would ever reach this point. All of it came together in her hands. By the time she played the final section, her touch had changed again. The gentleness was still there, but layered beneath it was a power she had earned. A strength she had never forced but had grown into slowly. Naturally, the final notes drifted into the air and settled softly around the hall. She held her hands above the keys for a moment, letting the silence stretch, letting the last sound fade fully. Then she lowered her hands to her lap. The hall remained silent for one breath, then another, and then the applause began, soft at first, then fuller, rising like a wave moving toward her. She didn't smile widely or raise her hands in excitement. She simply bowed her head gently, acknowledging the moment with quiet gratitude. She had done it. Her gentle beginning had not hidden her strength. It had prepared her for it. And the piano had sung with a power that came from her very core. She walked off the stage with steady steps, feeling lighter than she had in months. Her mentor stood waiting for her, his expression filled with calm pride. She didn't need to hear words of praise. She didn't look for them. She just breathed in, slowly and deeply, knowing that the final part of her journey was still ahead. But today, she had lived a moment she would remember for the rest of her life. The morning after the competition felt strangely quiet. She woke before the sun had risen, the sky still covered in a soft shade of gray. For a moment, she simply lay still, listening to the silence around her. It wasn't the same silence she used to hear on mornings before practice. This one felt full, almost warm, as if the world was giving her a gentle space to breathe. After everything she had poured out on that stage, she stretched her fingers slowly, feeling the familiar ache that came after long hours at the piano. Instead of bothering her, it made her smile a little. That ache meant she had tried her best. It meant she had given everything she could. When she finally stepped out of bed and moved to the window, she could see the first faint light of the day spreading across the sky. She rested her hand on the cold glass and let out a long breath. Yesterday had been big, bigger than anything she had ever experienced. But now it was over, and life felt different. Even though nothing around her had changed, she spent a while thinking about the moment. The applause began how it grew softly at first and then swelled until she could feel it in her chest. She hadn't played for applause, but she couldn't deny that hearing it had filled her with a quiet joy she had never known before. But the best part wasn't the applause. It was the feeling she had while playing, like the world had fallen away, like the music had lifted her into a place where only truth existed. That was the part she wanted to keep with her. When she reached the breakfast table, her mentor was already there, sipping tea and reading quietly. He looked up when she walked in, his expression calm, warm, patient as always. "How do you feel today?" he asked. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "Different, but also the same." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "Good, that means you've grown." They ate in a peaceful silence. Every now and then she caught her mentor observing her, like he was quietly proud of something he didn't feel the need to say out loud. She appreciated that. The two of them had always shared a simple understanding, one that didn't need many words. Later in the day, she returned to the performance hall not because she had to, but because something inside her wanted to see it again. When she entered, it was empty, the seats silent, the lights off, the air carrying only the soft smell of polished floors. She walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing gently around the wide space. She approached the piano, the same one she had played on the night before, and rested her fingertips on the keys. For a moment she didn't press anything. She just stood there, the memories still fresh in her mind. Then, without planning to, she sat down and began to play not the competition piece, but something soft, almost like a quiet goodbye to the moment she had lived. The notes echoed beautifully in the empty hall. They felt freer this time, unburdened by pressure or expectation. The music moved slowly, like a peaceful thought stretching across the room as she played. She thought about how far she had come from the girl who played quietly at home because she didn't want to disturb anyone, to the girl who stepped onto a stage and let her emotions fill a room full of strangers. She had never imagined she would one day be capable of that, but she had done it, and now, sitting alone at the piano with the soft music flowing from her hands, she felt something she hadn't fully felt before. Pride. Not loud or overwhelming, but gentles, just like the beginning of her journey. When she finished playing, she sat still for a moment, letting the last note fade. Then she closed the piano lid slowly and stood up. Outside the hall, the day had grown brighter. Sunlight spilled across the ground, warming her skin as she stepped into it. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know where her music would take her, or how many new challenges she would face. But she knew she was ready. Over the next few weeks, people who had watched her performance began reaching out. Some sent messages. Some sent small letters describing how her playing had touched them. They told her their hearts felt lighter, that her music made them stop and feel something they didn't expect. She read every message carefully, always surprised that her quiet strength could reach so many people. Her mentor encouraged her to accept small invitations to play in nearby events. At first she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to perform again so soon. But each time she stepped onto a stage, she found a new layer of herself unfolding. Sometimes she played confidently. Sometimes her hands trembled a little. Sometimes the audience was large. Other times the room held only a handful of listeners. But no matter where she played, she carried the same feeling with Hertha, one she had discovered during the competition. The strength hidden behind her gentle beginning. With time, she learned to speak on stage as well. At first, her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. But soon, she found small ways to talk about her journey, her fears, her quiet love for music. Audiences listened carefully, and some even approached her afterward to tell her they related to her. She appreciated that more than applause. One evening, after a small performance in a warm, dimly lit room, an older woman approached her. Her eyes were kind and she held a soft smile. "Your playing reminds me of resilience," the woman said. "Not the loud kind. The kind that grows quietly, the kind that lasts." Those words stayed with her. She carried them home that night and thought about them as she lay in bed. Resilience, the word felt right. It described her journey more accurately than she had ever been able to. As the months passed, she continued to grow, not just as a pianist, but as a person. She learned patience, understanding, and a deeper connection with the music she played. Her mentor remained a steady presence, guiding her with gentle encouragement and reminding her that greatness didn't always come with noise or grand moments. Sometimes it grew quietly in small steps. One morning, she visited the old practice room, where everything had begun. For her, the same room where she once played softly, afraid to be heard. She sat at the piano there, the keys slightly worn. The room carrying memories in the dust and warmth. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. When she began to play, the sound felt familiar, yet transformed. The girl who once sat in this room was not the same person she was now. That realization brought a soft warmth to her chest. She finished the piece and sat in silence for a moment. Then she whispered something to herself, simple words, but full of meaning. "I'm not afraid anymore." From that day onward, she stepped into her music with a new sense of purpose. She no longer played just to prove herself or to overcome fear. She played because music had become a part of her, a language she understood deeply, a place where she felt truly herself. And every time she played, the piano sang with a power shaped by her. Her gentle beginning had not been a weakness. It had been the foundation of her strength, and now, as she continued forward, she knew that the world would hear that strength not through loudness, but through the steady, graceful music she carried within her.